The small shuttle moved through the purple sky of Nexus Prime. Inside, Ambassador Paul Carter looked out the window at the massive city below. He had been to this planet many times before, but today felt different. Today something was wrong. Paul was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had spent 20 years working with alien species, learning their ways, trying to make friends for Earth. Beside him sat Commander Lisa Grant, a military officer with short black hair and a serious face. On his other side was Dr. Henry Shaw, an old man who knew more about alien history than anyone else on Earth. The shuttle landed on a platform made of crystal that sparkled in the sunlight. Paul stood up and straightened his diplomatic uniform. Lisa checked her datapad one more time. Henry gathered his research files. None of them spoke. They all felt the tension in the air. The council chamber was huge. It looked like it went up forever into the clouds. Hundreds of different alien species sat in rows that spiraled upward. The Zrathi were there looking like giant insects with hard shells and clicking mouths. The Velkrin were there too, looking like beautiful snakes that coiled in their seats. The Borath stood like living statues made of stone and metal. High Counselor Vreth sat at the top. He was old even for a Zrathi. His shell had scars from thousands of years of life. When he spoke, a machine translated his words into English. "The human delegation will come forward," Vreth said. Paul led his team to the center of the huge room. He bowed like he was supposed to. He had learned all the proper ways to show respect to the council. "Ambassador Carter," Vreth began. His voice sounded sharp, almost angry. "The council has looked at your species' expansion into the Sagittarius Arm. You have built 17 new colonies in 10 years. "Yes, High Counselor," Paul answered calmly. "All in unclaimed systems. We followed all the rules." The Zrathi section suddenly filled with clicking sounds. It took Paul a moment to realize they were laughing at him. His stomach tightened with worry. "Unclaimed by your simple scans, maybe," Vreth said. The contempt in his voice was clear even through the translator. "The Zrathi Empire now declares that all systems in the Sagittarius Arm belong to us. They have always belonged to us. You will remove your colonies in 30 days. Paul felt Lisa tense beside him. Henry's hand gripped his datapad tighter. 30 days. 3 million people lived in those colonies. Families, children, farmers, scientists. All of them would have to leave their homes. "High Counselor," Paul said carefully, keeping his voice steady. "Those systems showed no signs of anyone living there before. No ruins, no markers, no claims filed with the Council. We checked everything. We followed every rule. The Zrathi do not need markers for what has always been ours," Vreth declared. "We claimed that region 4,000 years before your species learned to write. Before you even knew fire." Paul's jaw tightened. He had studied the records. He knew there was no Zrathi presence in that area. Not 4,000 years ago, not ever. This was not about history. This was about power. "With respect, High Counselor," Paul said, "that claim was never registered with the Council. If the Zrathi want to dispute our territory, we are willing to go through proper arbitration." Vreth made a harsh scraping sound that might have been laughter. "Arbitration? Young species, you do not understand your place. The Zrathi do not arbitrate with children. We give orders. You obey them." More clicking sounds from the Zrathi sections. Other aliens watched silently. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked cold and calculating, like they were watching a business deal, not the fate of millions of people. Lisa spoke up, her voice firm despite the insult. "Our colonies have 3 million humans living there. Moving everyone would take time and resources. Then perhaps," Vreth said slowly, "you should have been more careful about where you sent your people. The Council recognizes the Zrathi claim. You have 30 days. This meeting is over." Paul stood his ground. He did not bow. He did not turn to leave. "We request a formal vote of the Council." Vreth's antennae twitched with irritation. For a moment Paul thought the High Counselor might refuse. But that would look bad, even for the Zrathi. "Very well," Vreth said. "Let no one say the Council is unfair to lesser species. All in favor of the Zrathi claim?" 2/3 of the chamber raised their hands or tentacles or whatever they used to signal agreement. The Velkrin did not vote. A few small species voted against the claim, but their voices did not matter in Council politics. The big empires made the decisions. "The matter is settled," Vreth announced. 30 days, Ambassador. After that, any human presence in those systems will be considered an invasion. We will respond with force. Paul turned and walked back toward the exit. Lisa and Henry followed close behind. The three humans said nothing until they were back in their shuttle and the doors had closed. "Paul, this is insane," Henry said, his voice shaking with anger. "I have studied the archives for 30 years. There is nothing in the records about Zrathi presence in that region. Nothing. This is theft." "I know," Paul said quietly. He sat down heavily in his seat. "The question is why? The Zrathi have never shown interest in that area before. Why now?" Lisa's face was grim. "There is something there they want, and they think we will just roll over and give it to them. Send a priority message to Earth," Paul ordered. "Tell them everything. And request a meeting with Admiral Frank Hayes. We need to know what our military options are." The shuttle lifted off from the crystal platform. Through the window, Paul watched the towers of Nexus Prime fade into the distance. For 300 years, humanity had been the new kids in the galaxy. They had been polite, careful, respectful. They had followed every rule, learned every custom, tried to fit in. Paul had believed in that approach. He had built his entire career on it. But watching the Council vote away human colonies without even pretending to care about justice or law, something changed inside him. Maybe being polite was not enough. Maybe respect had to be earned, not asked for. The flight back to Earth would take 3 days. 3 days to figure out how to tell the president that the galaxy they had worked so hard to join had just betrayed them. 3 days to decide if humanity would bow to the Zrathi Empire or stand and fight. Paul looked at Lisa and Henry. Both of them looked angry and scared. He probably looked the same way. "What do we do?" Henry asked quietly. Paul thought about the 3 million people living on those colonies. People who had left Earth to build new lives, to raise families, to explore the stars. People who trusted their government to protect them. "We do not abandon them," Paul said. "Whatever it takes, we do not abandon our people." Lisa nodded. "Even if it means war?" Paul looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Zrathi fleet was probably already preparing to enforce their claim. And on Earth, military commanders would be calculating whether humanity could survive a fight with an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 6,000 years. "Even then," Paul said, "we will find a way. We have to." The shuttle jumped to hyperspace, carrying 3 humans back to Earth with news that would change everything. Behind them, the Galactic Council continued with its business, certain that the matter was settled. The Zrathi were satisfied. The smaller species were quiet. Everything was as it should be. But High Counselor Vreth, sitting alone in his chamber after the session, felt something he had not felt in a very long time. A small doubt. A tiny question. The way the human ambassador had looked at him in that final moment before leaving, not with fear, not with submission, with defiance. Vreth dismissed the thought. Humans were young, weak. They would obey or they would be destroyed. That was how the galaxy worked. That was how it had always worked. But the doubt remained, small and persistent like a grain of sand in an oyster. And like that grain of sand, it would grow into something much larger in the days to come. The emergency meeting room sat deep underground in Geneva, 3 levels below the United Earth Government headquarters. President Claire Morgan sat at the head of a long table. Her face looked like it was carved from stone as she listened to Ambassador Paul Carter's report. His image appeared as a hologram above the table, life-sized and clear. "They gave us 30 days, Paul finished. And they made it very clear this is not a negotiation. We evacuate or they attack." The room was silent for a moment. Then Admiral Frank Hayes spoke. He was a man who had spent 40 years in the military. His hair was gray like steel. His eyes were sharp and cold. He had seen war before and survived it. "Madam President, we need to discuss what the Zrathi do not know," Frank said carefully. Claire nodded. "Dr. Karen Woods, please explain." An elderly woman stood up. She had kind eyes but a very sharp mind. Dr. Woods had led the Deep Space Research Initiative for 20 years. She activated a holographic display that floated above the table. 3 months ago, Karen began, our colony on Haven made a discovery. We found a structure buried 3 kilometers underground. It is very old. We think it was built at least 10 times longer ago than the current Galactic Council has existed. The hologram showed images of a huge underground complex. The walls were covered in writing that seemed to glow and move even in the still pictures. The structure appears to be some kind of library, Karen continued, but we have barely begun to understand what is inside. Our early analysis suggests it contains information about advanced technology, energy systems, ways to travel through space, things that make current Council technology look like Stone Age tools. Senator Jacob Price leaned forward. He was a thin man with glasses and a worried expression. Do the Zrathi know about this discovery? We believe so, Karen confirmed. They have spies throughout Council space. If they found out, it would explain why they suddenly want that territory. They want us gone before we figure out what we have found. Can we evacuate all the colonies in 30 days? Claire asked. Admiral Frank shook his head slowly. Not completely, Madame President. We can get essential personnel out. We can evacuate civilians. But 3 million people in 30 days? We would need twice that time, maybe more. And our fleet is not positioned for a mass evacuation. We spread out our ships across the colonies for defense and exploration. What are our military options? Claire asked. Her tone suggested she already knew the answer would not be good. Frank brought up new displays showing ship positions and fleet strength. The Zrathi Empire has been traveling through space for over 6,000 years. They have 300 battlecruisers. Each one can destroy a planet from orbit. Their technology is mature and tested in dozens of wars. We have 72 capital ships. Most of them were built for exploration, and we added weapons later. So we lose, Senator Price said heavily. Is that what you were saying? In a straight fight, yes, Frank admitted. We lose badly. But there are other things to consider. Like what? Claire asked. The Zrathi are old, Frank said. Ancient. They have been the dominant power for so long that they have forgotten what it means to fight someone who is actually dangerous. They fight like empires do, with overwhelming force and very predictable strategies. We fight like survivors. That sounds like you were just trying to make us feel better, Admiral, another senator said. No, Lisa Grant spoke up through the hologram link. She was still with Paul on their ship returning to Earth. The Admiral is right. I have reviewed every Zrathi battle in the historical archives. They are predictable. They follow patterns that were established thousands of years ago. They have never fought an opponent who does not play by their rules, Karen Woods added. And if we can get more information from that ancient site before we are forced to leave, we might find something that helps us. Something that gives us a chance. Claire was quiet for a long time. Her fingers drummed on the table. Everyone waited. Finally, she spoke. I want 2 operations running at the same time. First, begin evacuating civilians immediately. Children first, then elderly, then anyone who is not essential. Second, Admiral Hayes, I am authorizing you to position our fleet for defensive operations. And Dr. Woods, you have 30 days to learn everything you can from that ancient structure. Madame President, Paul's hologram said carefully, if we prepare for military action, if the Zrathi see us moving our fleet into defensive positions, they will take it as a threat. They will say we are provoking them. Let them say it, Claire replied coldly. I will not abandon 3 million of our people because some ancient empire decided to flex its muscles. We will evacuate everyone we can, but we are not leaving our colonies defenseless. If the Zrathi want to fight, they will get one. The Council will not support us, Paul warned. They already voted against us. The Council just voted to steal our legitimate colonies, Claire said. I am done caring what they think. Ambassador, return to Nexus Prime. File every legal challenge you can. Slow them down. Buy us time. Admiral, prepare the fleet. Everyone else, we have 30 days to turn this disaster into something we can survive. The meeting ended. People stood up and began to leave, talking in worried voices. Frank approached Claire privately when most of the others had gone. You know this could mean war, he said quietly. Yes, Claire replied. She looked tired suddenly, older than her years. But Frank, I have read the histories of every species in the Council. Do you know how they all got their power? They fought for it. They bled for it. They took it from someone else. We are the only species that got a seat at the table by being polite and following rules. Maybe it is time the galaxy remembered something about humans. What is that? Frank asked. That we did not get to the top of our planet's food chain by being prey, Claire said. We got there by being the most dangerous thing in the room. Maybe it is time to remind them of that. Frank smiled, but it was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a warrior who knows hard times are coming. Then let us make sure they remember it well. Over the next few days, humanity moved with purpose. Every available ship rushed to the Sagittarius colonies to begin evacuations. Transports that normally carried cargo were refitted to carry people. Passenger ships that took tourists to Mars were redirected to Haven and the other threatened worlds. On Haven itself, Captain Eric Stone coordinated the massive effort to move people off the planet. Lines of families stretched for kilometers at every spaceport. People carried what they could. Children clutched toys. Old people looked back at homes they had built with their own hands. Everyone was scared, but they were orderly. Humans were good at staying calm in a crisis. Deep underground, Dr. Karen Woods worked day and night at the ancient structure. Her team of scientists operated in shifts around the clock. The structure responded to their presence in strange ways. Lights would turn on when they entered a room. Walls would display images and text they could not yet read. It was like the structure was trying to communicate, but they did not speak the same language. "This is incredible," Karen said to her assistant one night. Or was it day? She had lost track of time. This civilization was so far ahead of us, so far ahead of the current council, and they just vanished. Where did they go? Maybe they were destroyed, her assistant suggested. Maybe, Karen said. But if they were destroyed, what could have done it? What could threaten a civilization this advanced? She did not have an answer, but she kept working, kept searching through the ancient data, hoping to find something that could help humanity survive the coming storm. In orbit around Earth, the military prepared. Admiral Frank Hayes stood on the bridge of the Earth defense ship Defiance, his flagship. Around him, crews worked to prepare the ship for battle. They checked weapon systems, ran drills, practiced emergency procedures. "Sir?" Commander Greg Murphy said. Greg was Frank's tactical officer, a young man who was very good at his job. "The fleet will be ready to move in 3 days. But sir, are we really going to fight the Zrathi?" Frank looked out at the stars. "I do not know, Greg. I hope it does not come to that. But if it does, we will do our duty. We will protect our people, even if we cannot win, especially if we cannot win," Frank said. "Because that is when it matters most. When the odds are against you, when survival seems impossible, that is when you find out what you are really made of. The Zrathi think we are weak because we are young. Maybe they are right. But they are about to find out that young does not mean helpless." Back on Nexus Prime, Ambassador Paul Carter filed complaint after complaint with the Council. He requested hearings, demanded arbitration, cited laws and precedents. Most of his complaints were dismissed, but each one took time to process. Each one delayed the Zrathi by a few hours or a day. Ambassador Sylth of the Velkrin met with him privately one afternoon. She coiled gracefully in her chair, her golden eyes studying him carefully. "You are fighting a losing battle, Ambassador," she said gently. "Perhaps," Paul admitted, "but it is my battle to fight. The Zrathi will not change their minds. The Council will not overrule them. This is decided." "Then why are you here?" Paul asked. Sylth was quiet for a moment. "Because I want you to know that not everyone agrees with what is happening. The Velkrin do not support this action, but we are not powerful enough to stop it. The galaxy runs on." The 30 days passed too quickly. On Haven, the largest of the disputed colonies, Captain Eric Stone watched the last civilian transports lift off into the purple evening sky. 2 million people had made it off the planet. 800,000 remained, mostly workers who had stayed behind to help with the evacuation, scientists still studying the ancient structure, and volunteers who refused to leave their homes. Eric was a career military man, 40 years old with a square jaw and steady hands. He had seen combat in the border skirmishes with pirates, but nothing like what was coming. He stood at the command center watching the orbital displays. The human defense fleet had taken position around the colonies, 72 ships against an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 6,000 years. "Captain, Dr. Woods is still down in the repository," his communications officer reported. "She refuses to evacuate." Eric swore under his breath and grabbed his communicator. "Karen, what are you doing?" "The Zrathi fleet could arrive any moment." Karen's voice came back breathless with excitement and exhaustion. "Eric, I found something. The repository is not just a library. It is a weapon, a defense system. The species that built this place, they designed it to protect against exactly this kind of invasion." "Can you use it?" Eric asked urgently. "I do not know," Karen admitted. "The interface is active, but I cannot read most of the instructions. It might take days or weeks to figure out how it works." "We do not have days," Eric said, looking at the display. Red warning lights were starting to flash. Karen, you have 10 minutes to get to an evacuation site, or I am sending troops to drag you out. In orbit, Admiral Frank Hayes stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching sensor readings with growing tension. Commander Greg Murphy worked at his station, his young face pale but determined. Admiral, we are detecting jump signatures at the edge of the system, Greg reported. Multiple contacts. Very large. Sir, it is the Zrathi fleet. Frank felt his stomach tighten but kept his voice calm. How many? I count 150 vessels, Greg said quietly, including 47 battlecruisers, 150 ships, more than twice the human fleet, and those battlecruisers were each 3 times the size of the Defiance. Send to all ships, Frank ordered. Battle stations. But no one fires unless fired upon. We do not start this. Let them make that choice. The Zrathi fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a school of metal sharks. Their ships were ancient and beautiful, hulls covered in decorative plates that had been polished for centuries. Each ship bore the marks of countless battles. These were not exploration vessels hastily armed for war. These were weapons refined over millennia. The human fleet looked small and fragile by comparison, but they held their positions arranged in a defensive sphere around Haven. Every human captain and crew member knew they were likely to die. But they also knew that 3 million of their people had made it to safety because of the time they had bought. And 800,000 more depended on them now. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Paul Carter stood in the council chamber for what he knew might be the last time. The chamber was packed. Every species had sent representatives to watch what many expected to be humanity's humiliation and defeat. High Counselor Vreth presided over the session, his ancient carapace gleaming under the chamber lights. He looked satisfied, almost pleased. Ambassador Carter, Vreth announced to the full chamber, the deadline has expired. Your colonies remain occupied. Your military forces have taken defensive positions in our territory. This is an act of war, Paul stepped forward. For 300 years, humans had been diplomatic, respectful, careful. They had learned alien customs, followed every rule, tried to fit in. Paul had built his entire career on that approach. But looking at Vreth, at the other council members who had voted to steal human colonies, he felt that old approach die inside him. Sometimes respect could not be asked for. It had to be taken. High Counselor, Paul said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. Let us be honest about what is happening here. There was no Zrathi presence in those systems. No historical claim. You are taking our colonies because you can, because you are old and powerful and you think we are too young to fight back. A shocked silence fell over the chamber. No one spoke to a High Counselor that way. It broke every rule of diplomatic protocol. Careful, Ambassador, Vreth warned, his mandibles clicking with anger. You speak dangerously. No, Paul said. I speak honestly. For 300 years, humanity followed every rule. We respected every tradition. We deferred to every ancient power. We joined this council believing it stood for law, for justice, for peaceful cooperation between species. But this action shows us the truth. The council is just a mask for empire. The strong take what they want and the rest of you pretend it is legal. Several smaller species shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The Velcrin Ambassador Sylth uncoiled slightly, her golden eyes fixed on Paul with something that might have been approval. If humanity contests the Zrathi claim, Vreth said, his voice dangerous now, we are prepared to settle the matter with force. Your fleet has taken military positions in our territory. That is an act of war. Your territory? Paul laughed, and the sound was bitter. You claimed it 6 days ago. But yes, High Counselor, if you attack our colonies, our fleet will defend them. You want war? Then you get war. The chamber erupted in noise. Council members chittered, hissed, and rumbled to each other. Some looked shocked. Others looked satisfied, as if a troublesome question had finally been answered in the way they expected. So be it, Vreth declared. The Zrathi Empire will enforce council law, and when we are finished, humanity will understand its place in the galactic order. Paul bowed, but it was a mocking gesture now, not a respectful one. We shall see, High Counselor. History is full of ancient empires that thought they would last forever. Let us see if yours is different. In the Haven system, warning alarms blared across every human ship. The Zrathi fleet had finished its deployment and was moving into attack formation. They are hailing us, the communications officer reported. Put them through, Frank ordered. The view screen filled with the image of a Zrathi commander. His carapace was painted with rank symbols and battle honors. His mandibles moved as he spoke, the translator rendering his words into cold, precise English. Human vessels, you are in violation of council law. Power down your weapons and withdraw from this system immediately, or you will be destroyed. Frank stepped forward so the Zrathi commander could see him clearly. This is Admiral Frank Hayes of the United Earth Defense Fleet. These colonies are under our protection. We will not abandon our people. Then you choose extinction, the Zrathi commander said. Your fleet cannot match ours. Your species has been in space for only 3 centuries. We have fought wars that lasted longer than your entire recorded history. This is your final warning. Frank looked at the tactical display. 150 Zrathi ships against 72 human vessels. The mathematics were brutal and clear, but mathematics did not account for everything. Commander, Frank said calmly, you are used to fighting species like yourselves. Old, slow, predictable. You follow battle plans written thousands of years ago. You fight with honor and ancient traditions. We do not have those luxuries. The Zrathi commander's antennae twitched slightly. We are young, Frank continued. We are desperate. And we learn fast. You think this is a simple military operation. You think you will crush us and go home to celebrate. But Commander, we are humans. We spent our entire history as a species learning new and creative ways to kill things that try to kill us. We did not get to the top of our planet's food chain by being weak. We got there by being the most dangerous thing in the room. You cannot win, the Zrathi commander said, but his voice held less certainty than before. Maybe not, Frank agreed. But we will make absolutely sure you remember the cost. Every ship you lose, every warrior who does not come home, you will remember it was humanity that killed them. We might die here today, Commander, but you will spend the next 1,000 years looking over your shoulder, wondering when the survivors will come for revenge. Frank cut the transmission before the Zrathi could respond. He turned to his crew. Every face was pale but determined. They knew what was coming. All ships, this is Admiral Hayes, he said into the fleet-wide channel. In about 30 seconds, they are going to open fire. We are outnumbered. We are outgunned. We are probably going to die here. But we are not going to die quietly. We are not going to make this easy for them. We are going to teach these ancient empires that humanity does not surrender. We do not bow. And we defend our own, no matter the cost. He paused, looking around the bridge at his crew. Good people. Young people. People who deserved to live long lives and die peacefully in their beds. Instead, they would die here in the cold of space, buying time for others to escape. For Earth, Frank said quietly. For our colonies. For every human depending on us. All ships weapons free. Make them remember us. The Zrathi fleet opened fire. Space lit up like a star being born. Plasma cannons that had been perfected over 6,000 years of warfare fired in perfect synchronization. The first salvo was designed to cripple, to show overwhelming force to make the enemy surrender before too much blood was spilled. The battle raged in the darkness of space. Human ships darted between the massive Zrathi battlecruisers like angry wasps attacking elephants. The Earth defense ship Vigilant dove under a formation of 3 enemy cruisers, its missile pods releasing a swarm of smart weapons. Most were shot down by Zrathi point defense, but 17 made it through, striking the underside of the lead battlecruiser. The damage was not critical. The ancient armor held, but it was damage, and the Zrathi were not used to being hurt. On the bridge of the Defiance, Admiral Frank Hayes watched the tactical display with grim determination. They had been fighting for 20 minutes. It felt like hours. The human fleet had lost 12 ships already. The Zrathi had lost 2 and had 8 more damaged. The mathematics were brutal. At this rate, the human fleet would be destroyed in less than an hour. Sir, the Guardian is requesting permission to ram, Commander Greg Murphy reported, his voice tight with emotion. They have lost main power and weapons. Captain Ross says she can still move. Frank closed his eyes for a moment. Captain Helen Ross had served with him for 20 years. She had 2 kids in the military academy back on Earth. Now she was asking permission to turn her ship into a missile, to spend her life buying a few more minutes for others. Permission granted, Frank said, his voice heavy. Tell Helen I am sorry. Tell her she is a hero. The Guardian's engines fired one last time. The battered ship accelerated toward the nearest Zrathi battlecruiser. The enemy ship tried to adjust position, tried to bring its weapons to bear, but the ancient vessel was too slow to react. The Guardian struck the battlecruiser at the midpoint of its hull. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the Guardian's reactor went critical. The explosion was bright enough to light up the entire system, a miniature sun blooming in the void. When the light faded, both ships were gone. Captain Helen Ross and her crew of 400 Zarathi warriors, all gone in an instant, but the Zarathi advance had faltered. The other battle cruisers adjusted their formations, moving more cautiously now. They had been taught respect, paid for in blood. On Haven's surface, Dr. Karen Wood stood before the ancient control interface. Her hands moved over panels covered in symbols she barely understood. Around her, the repository hummed with power, lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost alive. "Come on," she whispered. "You were built to defend. So defend us, please." Captain Eric Stone burst into the chamber. "Karen, we have to go now." "The battle is right above us. If a Zarathi ship breaks through, they will bombard the surface." "Just one more minute," Karen pleaded. "I am so close. I can feel it." "The system is responding." Eric looked at the displays showing the space battle. Human ships were dying up there. Good people were sacrificing themselves. For what? For time. Time for civilians to evacuate. Time for scientists like Karen to maybe, possibly find a miracle. "1 minute," Eric said. "Then I carry you out myself." Karen's hands moved faster over the controls. The repository had shown her images, patterns, sequences. She did not understand the technology, but she understood purpose. This place was built to protect. It had defensive systems. She just needed to activate them. Her finger pressed a symbol that looked like a shield crossed with a star. Deep beneath Haven's surface, power surged through conduits that had been dark for eons. Systems that had slept longer than human civilization had existed came online. The entire planet began to vibrate at a frequency that made instruments scream. On the Defiance, Greg shouted in alarm, "Sir, we are reading massive energy signatures from the surface. Power levels are off every scale we have." Frank grabbed the communications panel. "Karen, what did you do?" On the planet, Karen looked around in wonder and terror. The walls of the repository were glowing now, bright enough that she had to shield her eyes. The humming had become a roar. She could feel the vibration in her bones. "I woke it up, Frank," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I woke it up." Across Haven's surface, the ground split open, but not from weapons or damage. It opened with purpose, with design. Ancient structures rose from beneath the soil, emerging after sleeping for countless ages. They were nothing like human or Zarathi technology. They looked organic and mechanical at the same time, like they had been grown rather than built. The weapons locked onto the Zarathi fleet with targeting systems that made human computers look like counting stones. They had been waiting for this. For thousands or millions of years, they had been waiting for invaders to threaten the world they were built to protect. And then, they fired. The weapons did not use plasma or missiles or lasers. They fired something else, something that the sensors could barely detect. Compressed gravitational waves, ripples in the fabric of space-time itself, traveling at speeds that made light look slow. The first wave hit 3 Zarathi battlecruisers in the vanguard. The ships did not explode. They did not burn. They simply ceased to exist, torn apart at the molecular level by forces that treated the laws of physics like suggestions. 5 more battlecruisers tumbled through space, their hulls crushed like paper cups in an invisible fist. On the Defiance, every human officer stared at their displays in shocked silence. "What just happened?" Greg whispered. "I have no idea," Frank admitted. "But whatever it is on our side." The Zarathi fleet broke formation in panic. Their commanders, who had fought wars for thousands of years, had never seen anything like this. Their ancient battlecruisers, which had destroyed planets and conquered empires, were being swatted from space like insects. The Zarathi commander tried to rally his forces. "All vessels converge on the planet. Destroy those surface installations. Kill them all." It was a desperate move, but it was all he had. 50 Zarathi battlecruisers turned toward Haven, their weapons charging for a planetary bombardment. They knew 20 or 30 of them would die in the attempt, but the rest would complete the mission. They would burn that planet and silence those terrible weapons. It was the mathematics of overwhelming force, the same calculations that had worked for 6,000 years of Zarathi dominance. They had not counted on human stubbornness, Admiral. Frank saw the Zarathi formation shift and understood immediately what they intended. "All ships intercept course. Get between them and the planet." "Sir, We will be destroyed, Greg protested. Yes, Frank agreed calmly. We will, but we will slow them down. Every second we buy is another second for those weapons to fire. Move now. The human fleet, battered and bleeding, threw itself between the Zrathi armada and the planet. It was suicide, but it was calculated suicide. Each human ship that died would delay the Zrathi by precious seconds, giving the ancient weapons time to recharge and fire again. The Earth defense ship Defiance led the charge. Frank stood on his bridge watching death approach with the calm of a man who had accepted his fate. Around him, his crew worked their stations. No one complained. No one questioned the order. They all understood what was at stake. Greg, Frank said quietly, "It has been an honor serving with you." "Sir," Greg replied, his voice thick with emotion. He did not say more. He did not need to. The Zrathi battlecruisers opened fire. The first volley destroyed 4 human ships. The second took 3 more. The Defiance's shields failed under the onslaught. Plasma fire burned through armor. Systems exploded. The bridge filled with smoke and sparks. But the human ships kept firing back. They targeted engines, weapons, anything that would slow the Zrathi advance. The Earth defense ship Horizon, its hull breached and burning, rammed a Zrathi cruiser at full speed. Both ships died, but the Zrathi advance was slowed by another 10 seconds. On Haven, the ancient weapons fired again. This time, the gravitational wave caught a cluster of 5 battlecruisers. The ships imploded, their matter compressed into a point and then scattered across space. The Zrathi were losing ships faster than they could count. The assault faltered. The Zrathi had started with 150 ships. They were down to just over 100 now. More than 30 ships destroyed, thousands of warriors dead, and the humans were still fighting. The Zrathi commander looked at his tactical display in growing disbelief. This was not how it was supposed to go. The humans were supposed to submit. They were young, weak, barely 3 centuries into space. They should have surrendered after the first volley. Instead, they were killing his people. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council watched the battle feed in stunned silence. High Counselor Vreth's mandibles clicked with agitation. This was supposed to be a demonstration of power, a reminder to the younger species why the ancient empires ruled. Instead, it was becoming a disaster. Ambassador Paul Carter stood in the center of the chamber watching the same feed. He saw human ships dying. He saw friends and colleagues sacrificed for a chance at survival. Part of him wanted to rage, to scream at the council that this was their fault. But another part, a colder part, saw the bigger picture. The galaxy was watching. Every species was seeing that humanity would not bow. They were seeing that the Zrathi could be hurt, that the ancient order could be challenged. "High Counselor," Paul said, his voice cutting through the silence, "I believe this would be an appropriate time to discuss a ceasefire." Vreth turned to face him, and Paul saw something in the alien's eyes that he had never seen before. Fear. The Zrathi do not negotiate with inferiors. The silence after the battle was worse than the noise of combat. Admiral Frank Hayes sat in his command chair on what remained of the Defiance's bridge. Emergency lights cast everything in red shadows. The viewscreen showed space filled with debris, the scattered remains of ships and warriors from both sides. They had lost 31 ships. 4,000 human personnel were dead or missing. The Zrathi had lost 37 battlecruisers and over 18,000 warriors. In any previous conflict in galactic history, these would be considered acceptable losses for both sides. But for the Zrathi, who had not suffered a serious defeat in over 2,000 years, this was a catastrophe. "Sir, we are receiving damage reports from the fleet," Commander Greg Murphy said. His face was burned on one side where a console had exploded during the battle. Medical teams were still working their way through the casualties. "Most ships are heavily damaged but salvageable. The Guardian, the Horizon, and the Valor are total losses." Frank nodded slowly. He would need to write letters to families. Thousands of letters. How do you tell someone their loved one died in a battle that should never have happened? How do you explain that their sacrifice bought humanity respect in a galaxy that only understood strength? "What about the Zrathi fleet?" Frank asked. "They have withdrawn to the edge of the system," Greg reported. "No hostile movements. It looks like they are really leaving." On Haven's surface, Dr. Karen Woods walked out of the repository for the first time in days. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Around her, the ancient weapons were powering down. sinking back into the ground. They had done their job. They had protected this world one more time. Captain Eric Stone was waiting for her at the entrance, a medical team standing by. Karen looked exhausted, her clothes stained with dirt and sweat, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "Did we win?" she asked. Eric smiled, but it was a tired smile. "We survived." "I think that counts as winning." Karen laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "I barely understand what I did down there, Eric. That technology is so far beyond us. I just pushed buttons and hoped for the best." "Well, your button pushing saved 800,000 people," Eric said, "and maybe saved humanity's future in this galaxy. I would say you did pretty well. 3 months passed. 3 months of recovery, rebuilding and reckoning with what had happened. The news of the Battle of Haven spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Humanity, the young species that everyone had dismissed as weak and naive, had fought the Zarathi Empire to a standstill. They had revealed technology that predated the current galactic civilization. They had proven they would rather die than submit to unjust demands. The political landscape of the Galactic Council shifted like sand in a storm. Species that had been silent for centuries suddenly found their voices. Trade agreements were renegotiated. Military alliances were reconsidered. The old order, based on the dominance of ancient empires, was no longer as certain as it had been. Ambassador Paul Carter stood once again before the Galactic Council. The chamber looked the same, but everything felt different. The way other species looked at humanity had changed. There was still caution, still calculation, but also something new: respect. High Counselor Vreth presided over the session. He looked older somehow, as if the battle had aged him in ways that thousands of years had not. "The Council has reviewed the territorial dispute regarding the Sagittarius Arm," Vreth announced. His tone was formal, careful. "In light of new information and circumstances, we recognize humanity's legitimate claim to the colonies in question. The Zarathi Empire withdraws its territorial assertion." Paul bowed politely. He did not smile. He did not gloat. "The United Earth government appreciates the Council's wisdom and justice." "Furthermore," Vreth continued, and Paul heard something that might have been grudging respect in the translated voice. "The Council invites humanity to participate in the Interspecies Defense Initiative. Your combat tactics and strategic innovations would be valuable to our collective security." Translation: they wanted to learn how humans fought. They wanted to understand the strategies that had bloodied the most powerful empire in the galaxy. They wanted to make sure they could counter those tactics if humanity ever turned hostile. "We would be honored to participate," Paul replied. "Humanity believes in cooperation and mutual defense. We look forward to contributing to galactic security." The session ended with formal pleasantries. As the delegates filed out, Ambassador Sylth of the Velcrin approached Paul. She moved with her characteristic grace, her serpentine body coiling elegantly. "You have changed the galaxy, Ambassador," she said quietly. "The balance of power has shifted. The ancient empires no longer seem so eternal." "We did not want to change anything," Paul said honestly. "We just wanted to keep our homes." "And in doing so, you reminded everyone of a fundamental truth," Sylth said. "Power does not come from age or tradition. It is earned, usually in blood. The Zarathi learned that lesson. Others have taken note. Is that a good thing?" Paul asked. Sylth considered the question. "That depends on what humanity does with its newfound respect. You could use it to build alliances, to create a more just galaxy, or you could become what you fought against. Time will tell." On Earth, President Claire Morgan stood with Admiral Frank Hayes on a balcony overlooking Geneva. Below them, massive crowds celebrated. The surviving fleet had returned 2 weeks ago. There had been parades, ceremonies, medals awarded. The fallen had been honored with state funerals. The entire planet was still processing what had happened. "We lost so many good people," Frank said quietly. He walked with a cane now. His injuries from the battle had been severe. He would never serve on a ship again, but he had earned his retirement. "Yes," Claire agreed, "but we also proved something important. Humanity has earned its place in this galaxy, not because the Council gave it to us, but because we claimed it. We fought for it. What happens now?" Frank asked, watching the celebrations below. Claire looked up at the sky. The sun was setting and the first stars were becoming visible. "Now we build. We grow stronger. We learn everything we can from that ancient repository on Haven. and we make sure that the next time someone threatens us, we are even more ready. You think there will be a next time? I know there will be, Claire said. We have proven we are not easy prey. That makes us either valuable allies or dangerous enemies. Some species will want to be our friends. Others will want to eliminate us before we become too powerful. But Frank, we have sent a message to the entire galaxy. We have told them that humanity does not surrender. We do not bow. We fight for what is ours, no matter the cost. Frank nodded slowly. Then I hope we are training the next generation well. They will need to be ready. We are, Claire assured him. Military academies are overflowing with applicants. Everyone wants to be part of the fleet now. The Battle of Haven has become the defining moment of this generation. Those kids will grow up knowing that when pushed to the wall, humanity fought back and survived. On Haven, life was slowly returning to normal. The 800,000 people who had stayed during the evacuation were rebuilding damaged infrastructure. The colony was growing again as people who had left decided to return. This was their home, and they had fought for it. Dr. Karen Woods had become something of a celebrity, though she hated the attention. She spent most of her time at the ancient repository, now surrounded by research facilities and protected by a permanent military garrison. The structure still held countless secrets, technology that could revolutionize everything from medicine to space travel, weapons that could change the balance of power in the galaxy. But Karen was careful. She had seen what those weapons could do. She understood the responsibility of having such power. Her team worked slowly, methodically, learning to understand the technology rather than just using it blindly. How long will it take to fully understand this place? Her assistant asked one day. Karen looked around at the vast underground complex, at the walls covered in alien script, at the machines that hummed with power beyond human comprehension. Generations, she said. Maybe centuries. But we have time now. We earned it. The news of humanity's stand spread beyond Council space. In the outer regions, in the frontier worlds where dozens of small civilizations struggled to survive, humans became a symbol. If the young species could stand up to the Zrathi, maybe others could too. Maybe the old order could be challenged. Some of these species reached out to humanity, seeking alliances and trade agreements. Others watched and waited, calculating when to make their own moves. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had become a major player in that change. In the Zrathi Empire, the aftermath of the battle caused political upheaval. High Counselor Vreth faced challenges to his authority for the first time in 1,000 years. Younger Zrathi warriors questioned why they had been sent to fight a war that did not need to happen. Families mourned warriors who had died for what increasingly looked like a mistake. The Zrathi Empire remained powerful. They still had hundreds of battle cruisers, thousands of years of experience, vast territories. But they had learned that power was not absolute. They had learned that even the young could be dangerous if pushed too far, and they had learned to respect humanity.